The UFC's biggest card of the year just got thrown into complete chaos. And it all started with a mysterious mark on Justin Gaethje's neck that has the entire MMA world losing their minds. We're talking about UFC 324, the inaugural event under their massive $7.7 billion Paramount deal. And the main event between Gaethje and Paddy Pimblett might be completely dead in the water. But here's the kicker. This potential disaster could actually fix the biggest matchmaking controversy the UFC has created all year.
Rumors have been swirling that Justin Gaethje is injured. A few videos have surfaced of him diving and cracking heads with someone, which wobbled him bad. Do you have any inside information?
Look, when photos surfaced showing Gaethje with what looked like a crater on his neck, fans immediately went into panic mode. Everyone's first thought? Staph infection. And if you know anything about combat sports, that's basically a death sentence for any fight. The timing couldn't be worse for the UFC either. This is supposed to be their showcase event, the first major card under that blockbuster Paramount partnership, and their main event fighter might have a bacterial infection that could sideline him for months. Dana White and company are probably having nightmares about explaining to Paramount executives how their inaugural event fell apart because of a neck wound.
Enter Armin. Walking out there eating a turkey leg. I mean...
Now here's where Gaethje tried to do damage control. He jumped on social media claiming it's just an ingrown hair, nothing serious. Quote, "I'm growing hair now, brisket, yeah, a little brisket on the chin, because they said he had herpes on his mouth and brisket and I had an ingrown hair." But come on, have you seen the footage? That's not some tiny red dot from an ingrown hair. This thing looks like a legitimate crater on his neck. Either Gaethje has the most aggressive ingrown hair in human history, or something way more serious is happening that he doesn't want to admit. And honestly, can you blame him for trying to downplay it? His biggest payday in years is on the line.
I think they need a fight at some point because I think Paddy Pimblett is awesome. Justin Gaethje's awesome. Arman and Ilya seem to have something. And not only something in terms of skill, but between the two that we could build a great fight around, right? So yeah, I think Arman's fantastic though, man. He's good. He looked great against Dan Hooker too.
In your opinion, why UFC is not giving Arman a title fight?
I don't know. I don't know why Arman's not fighting for a title. I really don't. I've heard the reason because of what happened in Los Angeles. I thought that by weighing in as the backup fighter when Ilya fought Charles, and then by going and fighting Charles Oliveira or Dan Hooker, it would be okay. I don't know. I don't know what the conversations that they're having behind closed doors are. Because they're telling him something that's making him okay with it, right? Because if he wasn't okay with it, he would be more loud about him not getting his opportunity.
But get this, the real controversy isn't even about Gaethje's neck situation. The entire MMA community has been absolutely roasting the UFC for who they chose to fight for this interim title in the first place. Arman Tsarukyan, the undisputed #1 contender, is sitting on the sidelines watching Paddy Pimblett get handed a title shot. Let me break down how insane this is. Tsarukyan is on a 5-fight winning streak with victories over elite competition like Dan Hooker, Charles Oliveira, and Beneil Darius. By every metric that's supposed to matter in this sport, he should be the one fighting for gold. Instead, the UFC gave the shot to Pimblett, whose biggest claim to fame is his social media following and his ability to sell tickets in Liverpool.
I kind of defer to they know more than we do, and so we got to kind of accept it for what it is because it seems like Arman is doing that too.
And here's what makes this even more frustrating for Tsarukyan. He was originally scheduled to fight Islam Makhachev for the undisputed title in January of last year. That was his moment, his shot at becoming champion. But then disaster struck during fight week when he suffered a legitimate injury and had to withdraw. Dana White's response? Basically told him he blew his chance and would have to work his way back up. Think about how harsh that is. The guy gets hurt through no fault of his own, and suddenly he's being punished like he showed up unprofessional or missed weight. Even after Tsarukyan came back and demolished Dan Hooker in 2 rounds, White still claimed he needed to do more work before getting another title shot.
Agreement by all, we're good. I believe that. Some people say, then Chael, why isn't he fighting for the belt? Well, I'll tell you why. He got put in what was known as a #1 contenders match in November. But that was supposed to draw into Ilya, who then says he's not going to be present, and they decide they're going to contest the title in January. So that would be a turnaround for Sarukian from November to January. And it's just very quick. I think that Sarukian's next fight is going to be for the title. That may end up being interim. That may, right? I mean, it's one of these. It's one of these things. It's one of these things that's got some moving parts. We don't all know yet what an interim belt is. We don't know. We largely agree as a community that at a minimum, an interim belt makes you the #1 contender for the undisputed belt. But when we saw that Aspinall had to wait as the interim champion, we found out that that wasn't completely right. So, but hear me out, because we would think that Paddy Gaethje, if Ilya returns, we then got to go do that match. That could delay the championship opportunity of Sarukian, but that's not because of a penance. You see the difference? Like we would have to do that. That wouldn't be a penance to Arman. We would have to give the interim champion the undisputed.
This stance has genuinely baffled some of the smartest minds in MMA. Daniel Cormier, a former two-division champion and Hall of Famer, has been openly questioning the logic behind keeping Tsarukyan away from title contention. Cormier has gone on record saying he believes Tsarukyan might actually be the best lightweight in the world right now, especially with Makhachev having moved up in weight. When someone of Cormier's caliber and experience is calling you the best fighter in the division, and you're still not getting title shots, something is seriously broken with the system.
UFC decided to go the route of Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje. Tell me this, how does Justin Gaethje go from getting knocked out by a featherweight to beating a number 12 ranked Rafael Fiziev to now getting an interim title shot? Paddy Pimblett kind of made sense just because of the amount of hype he has, but then Justin Gaethje, yes, he's a big name, but he's been doing absolutely nothing but threatening to retire if he doesn't get a title shot. They obviously didn't want Justin Gaethje to retire, and they obviously didn't want to feed Paddy Pimblett to Arman Sarukian, and then they also didn't want to give Arman Sarukian the next title shot. So an interim title between Paddy Pimblett and Justin Gaethje makes the most sense for them, apparently. If you had told me after that Jared Gordon fight that Paddy Pimblett would be 3 fights away from getting a title shot, bro, I would have crashed out. Look at Paddy Pimblett's last few wins. Bobby Green, who was on a 1-fight win streak, and then he beat Tony Ferguson, who was on like a 20-fight losing streak, and then he beat Michael Chandler.
Meanwhile, some voices are trying to defend the UFC's timeline here. Kale Sonnen points out that Tsarukyan recently served as a backup for a title fight, and even made weight for that role, which could be interpreted as the UFC's way of showing forgiveness for his previous withdrawal. The timing also played a role, with Tsarukyan fighting in late November and this title fight happening in January, creating a potentially too rapid turnaround. But let's be real, fighters have turned around quicker than that for big opportunities before. When there's enough money and prestige on the line, the UFC finds ways to make things work. Now let's talk about what this card actually represents beyond just the main event drama. UFC 324 features other incredible matchups that arguably deserve higher billing than they're getting. The co-main event has Kayla Harrison defending her title against Amanda Nunes, which is literally a clash between two of the greatest female fighters in history. Even Sean O'Malley acknowledged that while he understands the promotional appeal of Pimblett versus Gaethje, the Harrison-Nunes fight carries historical significance that could justify being the main event. This perfectly illustrates the constant tension within the UFC between rewarding competitive merit versus chasing commercial success.
I'm like,
Yeah.
the fans don't ever ask for a rematch or anything like that. He goes, that would have never. I'm like, I'm glad. He's unique, man, and he's one of my favorite guys to watch. So like, but if you want to beat Justin Gaethje, you have to. So he's a forward fighter and a pressure fighter that he will stand in the pocket, and he's gonna throw everything he got in that pocket. If you don't meet him, you'll get chewed up. So Paddy, the way to beat a guy who like does this, very violent, aggressive pressure fighter, you have to meet him. You have to throw when he throws. So you got to be brave, and you have to go when he goes in between his shots. If you do that, you got a fair shot. If you don't do that, if you're not brave and courageous and throw when he throws in between his shots, it's going to be a really long night. It's going to be a hard night for you.
But wait, there's more drama brewing in Pimblett's training camp that's got people talking. During a King of the Mat grappling tournament at his home gym, Pimblett got submitted by a calf slicer for the first time in 5 years. The footage shows his opponent, Aaron Jordan, sweeping Pimblett's leg and transitioning to apply devastating pressure until Pimblett had to tap. Now, some people might see this as a concerning sign heading into such a high-stakes fight. But seasoned observers recognize it as evidence of a fighter pushing himself to the limits in training, putting himself in difficult positions to grow and improve.
Like, they're just basically saying Paddy's more popular, you're getting it over Arman.
Yeah, it's kind of sad, right? And that's, I mean, God, I hate like how I kind of get into this too much, but I mean, that's really like, that's the definition of, monopoly, where a single promoter owns the title and the rankings. And it's not a good thing for the sport, in my opinion. And I have to question what it's going to do for the longevity of the sport. I don't think in the short term it's really going to make a big difference, right? Like, it's going to sell the next fight, right? It's going to sell the next pay-per-view. But trends tend to come and go, right? Fads tend to come and go. At some point, like, to have staying power and lasting power, I think it requires, a meritocracy-based system. It's going to require, some, if you want to bring in guys like Arman Tsarukyan or Movsar Evloev, I always mess up how I say his name. You want to bring in these Olympic wrestling level guys. I mean, they don't want to have to go out there and put on some ridiculous show to become a champion. They don't want to have to go on Instagram and start a podcast and make whatever kind of skits on social media and this silly kind of stuff. Like, they just want to be a world champion because they want to be the best athlete. And that's what makes me wonder how the staying power is going to be, right? When you're dealing with guys that are, legitimate athletes that want to be legitimate athletes, and they're getting passed up by guys that are entertainers.
Here's where the expert analysis gets really interesting, though. Eddie Alvarez, who ironically handed Gaethje his first UFC loss, offered a warning about the unique preparation challenge Pimblett faces. Alvarez emphasized that Gaethje brings a particular type of relentless intensity and suffocating pressure that simply cannot be replicated in standard training environments. If Pimblett trains in his usual comfortable environment with familiar partners who don't consistently push at that elite Gaethje-level intensity, he might find himself completely overwhelmed when experiencing that pressure for the first time in the actual fight. Alvarez's implication was crystal clear. Trying to adjust on the fly to Gaethje's approach is exactly the kind of mistake that leads to early finishes. And get this, Matt Brown offered an even broader critique of what this entire situation represents for the sport. Brown's frustration centered on the idea that Pimblett's rapid leap into a title fight feels less like a reward for defeating top contenders and more like a transparent promotional calculation based on popularity. Having witnessed the evolution of UFC matchmaking over many years, Brown sees this as emblematic of a troubling shift where metrics like ticket sales and social media engagement carry more weight than actual competitive accomplishments inside the cage. His commentary, delivered with sharp sarcasm, jokingly hinted at title shots being distributed based on viral moments. But beneath that humor lies genuine concern about the sport moving away from its meritocratic principles. So here's where everything comes full circle and gets absolutely wild. If Geeth's neck issue forces him out of UFC 324, the UFC would face a reality that's almost too ironic to believe. Logic would dictate that Arman Tsarukyan, the very fighter they controversially passed over for this title shot, would become the most obvious replacement option. Think about the poetry of that situation. A potential medical issue could inadvertently correct what many fans and observers already viewed as a fundamentally flawed matchmaking decision. The backup plan that seemed so unfair to so many people might suddenly become the main event that large segments of the fanbase wanted all along. It would be the ultimate twist of fate, forcing the UFC's hand to make the fight that should have been booked from the beginning. And honestly, it might be exactly what this sport needs to restore some faith in the idea that rankings and accomplishments still matter more than social media followers. So here's my question for you, drop it in the comments. Do you think Geeth is downplaying a serious medical issue, or is this really just an unfortunate ingrown hair situation? And if he does have to pull out, would Tsarukyan stepping in actually make this a better fight than what we were originally getting? If this breakdown of the chaos surrounding UFC 324 helped you understand what's really happening behind the scenes, smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that notification bell because this situation is developing fast and you don't want to miss any updates. I'll see you in the next one. But hold up, because there's another layer to this story that nobody's talking about, and it involves some serious behind-the-scenes politics that could change everything. Word on the street is that Paramount executives are absolutely furious about the potential main event collapse, and they're putting massive pressure on the UFC to deliver something even bigger to salvage their inaugural event. We're talking about corporate suits who just dropped nearly $8 billion expecting a guaranteed spectacle, and now they're staring down the barrel of a main event that might implode because of what looks like a medical emergency. Here's where things get really spicy, though. My sources are telling me that if Geeth does pull out, the UFC isn't just looking at Tsarukyan as a replacement. They're actually considering completely scrapping the interim title concept and going nuclear with a different approach entirely. Picture this. What if they convinced Islam Makhachev to come back down to lightweight for one night only? The champion versus Pimblett for the undisputed title, with Makhachev getting a massive payday to defend his belt one more time before permanently moving up to welterweight. The numbers would be absolutely insane. Paramount would get their marquee event, and suddenly we'd have a fight that makes way more sense from a competitive standpoint. But here's the problem with that scenario, and it's a big one. Makhachev has been very vocal about his decision to move up in weight, citing the brutal nature of cutting down to 155 pounds. The guy has been walking around significantly heavier, and asking him to cut that much weight on relatively short notice could be genuinely dangerous. Plus, there's the question of whether he'd even want to risk his legacy against a fighter who, let's be honest, most experts would favor him heavily against. Sometimes the smart business move for a champion is to avoid fights that offer high risk with relatively low reward, especially when that champion has already established his dominance in the division. Now let's talk about what's happening with Paddy Pimblett's preparation, because this situation is way more complex than people realize. Training footage that leaked from his camp shows him working extensively on takedown defense and ground positioning, which tells us his team is very aware of the grappling threats he'll face regardless of who his opponent ends up being. But here's what's fascinating about his approach. Instead of just drilling basic defensive techniques, he's been putting himself in deliberately bad positions and working his way out of them. That calf slicer submission we talked about earlier, that wasn't an accident or a sign of weakness. His coaches specifically encouraged him to explore those dangerous positions so he'd know how to escape if he found himself there during the actual fight. This kind of training philosophy is actually revolutionary in some ways, and it speaks to how seriously Pimblett is taking this opportunity despite what his critics might say. Traditional fight camps often focus on playing to a fighter's strengths and avoiding their weaknesses. But Pimblett's team is doing the opposite, deliberately exposing his vulnerabilities in training so they won't be vulnerabilities come fight night. Eddie Bravo, the legendary grappling coach, has been consulting with Pimblett's team specifically on this approach, bringing decades of experience in preparing fighters for high-pressure submission situations. But get this, There's drama brewing in Geith's camp too that could explain why he's been so secretive about his neck situation. Multiple sources are reporting that his training partners have been concerned about his overall health for weeks leading up to this fight announcement. Apparently, Geith has been pushing through what some described as flu-like symptoms, which would be consistent with a systemic infection like staph. If that's true, then his neck issue might just be the visible symptom of a much more serious underlying problem that could require extended medical treatment and recovery time. The scary part about staph infections in MMA is how quickly they can spread and how devastating they can be to a fighter's career if not treated properly. We've seen multiple high-profile cases where fighters tried to push through what they thought were minor skin issues, only to end up hospitalized with life-threatening complications. Kevin Lee had to withdraw from multiple fights due to staph complications. Court Magee nearly died from a staph infection that went systemic. The UFC medical team doesn't mess around with these situations, and if there's even a suspicion that Geith's neck issue could be bacterial, they'll pull him from the card regardless of how much money is at stake. Here's where the timing becomes absolutely critical for everyone involved. If Geith withdraws within the next week, there's still time to properly promote a replacement main event and build excitement among fans. But if this drags out for another 2 or 3 weeks, the UFC could find themselves in a situation where they're scrambling to put together a main event with minimal promotional buildup. Paramount executives are reportedly demanding daily updates on Geith's medical status, and they've made it clear that they expect a contingency plan that maintains the same level of star power and commercial appeal. And speaking of contingency plans, there's been whispers about some absolutely wild backup scenarios that the UFC is supposedly considering. One rumor suggests they've reached out to Conor McGregor's team about potentially stepping in, even though McGregor hasn't fought at lightweight in years and would need significant time to cut weight properly. Another rumor involves trying to convince Nate Diaz to come back for one fight, capitalizing on his massive fanbase and natural ability to generate pay-per-view buys. Both scenarios seem highly unlikely given the short notice, but the fact that these conversations are allegedly happening shows how desperate the situation might be becoming behind the scenes. But let's get back to Arman Tsarukyan, because his situation perfectly illustrates everything that's broken about modern MMA matchmaking. This guy has been the model of professionalism throughout this entire controversy. While other fighters might be blasting the UFC on social media or demanding immediate title shots, Tsarukyan has stayed quiet, continued training, and positioned himself as the obvious solution if problems arise. His team has confirmed that he's been staying in fight shape, specifically because they anticipated that opportunities might present themselves if the main event fell through. What makes Tsarukyan's position even more compelling is his recent performance against Dan Hooker, which many observers believe was one of the most technically impressive displays in lightweight division history. He didn't just win that fight. He completely dismantled a former title challenger who was coming off a strong performance against Makhachev. The precision of Tsarukyan's striking, combined with his wrestling credentials and fight IQ, suggests he might actually be the most well-rounded lightweight in the world right now. Daniel Cormier's assessment that Tsarukyan could be the best fighter in the division isn't just promotional hype. It's based on legitimate technical analysis of his skill set and recent performances. Here's something else that's been flying under the radar. The betting odds for this potential main event have been fluctuating wildly based on medical speculation about Geith's condition. Professional gamblers who specialize in MMA betting are reportedly putting significant money on the fight being canceled or changed, which suggests that people with inside information believe there's a real chance Geith won't be able to compete. The odds on various replacement scenarios are also shifting, with Tsarukyan emerging as the heavy favorite to step in if needed. But the most interesting development might be how this situation is exposing the fundamental tension between the UFC's role as a sports organization versus their role as an entertainment company. Traditional sports leagues prioritize competitive integrity above almost everything else. The best teams play in the biggest games, and rankings are based primarily on performance rather than popularity. But the UFC operates more like an entertainment conglomerate, where storylines, personalities, and commercial appeal often outweigh pure competitive merit. This Geith situation is forcing them to confront that contradiction in a very public way. Now here's where things get really fascinating from a business perspective. Paramount didn't just invest nearly $8 billion in the UFC because they wanted to own a sports league. They invested because they believe MMA content can drive subscriptions, advertising revenue, and global brand expansion across all their media properties. That means every major UFC event, especially inaugural events under new partnerships, needs to deliver not just for hardcore MMA fans, but for casual viewers who might be experiencing the sport for the first time. The pressure to create mainstream entertainment value is enormous, which explains why someone like Pimblett, with his charismatic personality and social media following, might get opportunities that seem undeserved from a purely competitive standpoint.